I know this is hard for you. It's what he would have wanted. It was a long time ago. So many things have changed since then.
I can only imagine, sir.
The cafe smelled faintly of roasted beans and old wood, the kind of scent that clung to memory long after you left. At a corner table near the window, Samuel sat with his coffee, the steam rising like whispers only he could hear. His hands were large but weathered, the veins raised like roads leading back to a past he no longer spoke about. His jacket was worn thin at the elbows, his shoulders slightly slumped as if carrying a weight no one else could see. People passed him by without noticing, just another aging man, alone with his thoughts. But there was nothing ordinary about Samuel, nothing at all. The door opened, the bell above it ringing sharply, and in walked Ethan, a young Navy SEAL, still fresh from the grueling days of training. His posture was upright, his stride purposeful, his eyes sharp like the men who had been drilled to see everything. He scanned the cafe, looking for a seat, until his gaze froze. His boots stopped dead on the wooden floor. The air seemed to thicken around him. He was staring at Samuel, or rather, at the ink on Samuel's forearm where his sleeve had slid back. It was a tattoo. Not just any tattoo, it was the insignia of a unit spoken of only in whispers, a brotherhood that had been dissolved long before Ethan was even born. He had seen it in grainy photographs during training, heard stories told in low voices by instructors late at night when recruits pressed them for legends, and now, that mark, faded but unbroken, was right in front of him. His chest tightened. He couldn't move. He couldn't look away. Samuel noticed the stare. His eyes, still sharp despite the years, rose slowly to meet Ethan's. For a long moment, the two men locked eyes. One, the living past. The other, the hopeful future. In that silence, Samuel knew, the boy recognized it. The tattoo had spoken again, louder than words. Ethan swallowed hard, gathered himself, and walked toward the table. His hands felt suddenly heavy, his throat dry. He stopped just beside the chair opposite Samuel, and spoke, his voice low but respectful. "Sir, that tattoo, is it what I think it is?" Samuel's eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion but in surprise. He hadn't heard anyone ask about it in decades. He could have lied, he could have brushed the boy off, but something in Ethan's voice, raw, reverent, made honesty feel like the only option. "A long time ago," Samuel said, his voice gravelly, the sound of years etched into every syllable. "Yes, it is." Ethan's chest rose and fell quickly. He asked softly, You were there, with that unit, the missions, the jungle." His words stumbled, as if afraid to break the fragile thread of truth. Samuel leaned back in his chair, studying the boy. He saw the eagerness, the fire, the need to know. He sighed, almost smiling. "Sit down, son. You look like you've been carrying a question your whole life." Ethan slid into the chair across from him, his heart pounding. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, unable to contain himself. "I've heard the stories," he said quickly. "They told us about the mission in the jungle, about the men who didn't make it. They said you disappeared after no one knew what happened." Samuel stared into his coffee. The steam curled like smoke, pulling him back through time. "Disappearing was easier," he murmured. "The world moved on. It didn't have room for ghosts like me." Ethan's voice cracked, almost pleading. "Please, sir, tell me what it was like. Tell me about them." Samuel's gaze lifted, his eyes glistening with something Ethan hadn't expected. "Grief. Heavy, enduring grief. You want to hear their names?" he asked softly. Ethan nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "Then, you'll have to hear their story too." And so Samuel began. He spoke of the heat first, how the jungle wrapped around you like a second skin, every breath thick, every step heavy. The air felt alive, he said. It buzzed with insects, with danger. You never really breathed. It felt more like drowning slowly. Ethan leaned in, hanging on every word. Samuel described the first night patrol. The moon was thin, barely light enough to see. Their boots sank into mud that seemed endless. Rifles clutched tight against their chests. Every sound was magnified, the croak of frogs, the rustle of leaves, the far-off call of something that didn't sound quite animal. And then, suddenly, the silence. The kind of silence that warned you death was near. "We froze," Samuel whispered. His hand trembled slightly. And Ethan could see the memory was not just a story, it was living inside him, replaying even now. And then, it happened. Gunfire split the night. My brother to the left, Haresi dropped before I even realized he'd been hit. The jungle lit up with muzzle flashes, screams, chaos. We fought like devils, not because we wanted to, but because there was no other choice. Ethan's jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists on the table. Samuel noticed, nodded slightly, and continued. We lost 3 men that night. Harris, Johnson, and little Mike. He was only 19. Samuel's voice cracked on the last name, 19, and he never made it home. Ethan whispered, "My God," but Samuel held up a hand. "Don't pity them. Remember them. That's what they'd want." His eyes locked on Ethan's. Every time we lost someone, we carved their initials into a piece of wood we carried as a unit that would grew heavy by the end. Samuel's voice drifted into another memory, a dawn raid, crawling through the underbrush, sweat pouring into their eyes, mosquitoes biting relentlessly. The target was close, the enemy camp hidden beneath camouflage nets and thick canopy. The order came. Move. We moved like shadows, Samuel said, his voice steady now. You don't think about fear in those moments. You think about the man next to you, his breathing, his footsteps, his trust in you. That's what keeps you moving. The fight was brutal, swift. Bullets tearing through the air, grenades exploding with deafening force. Samuel described the chaos with vivid details, the smell of gunpowder and blood mixing, the heat of fire spreading through dry leaves, the cries of men fighting for their lives. Ethan's chest heaved as if he were there, ducking through branches, heart racing, pulse hammering. Then Samuel paused. His eyes glistened again, his voice lower. We took the camp, but not all of us came back. Davis, he covered us with the last of his ammo. He stayed behind so the rest of us could get clear. When the smoke cleared, his position was silent. He swallowed hard. I still hear the echo of his last burst of fire in my dreams. That sound never leaves you. Ethan's throat closed. He forced himself to speak. And you, how did you survive it all? Samuel looked down at his trembling hands. I didn't. Not really. The man who walked out of that jungle, he wasn't the same man who walked in. Pieces of me stayed there, with them. He tapped his tattoo, the faded ink barely visible under wrinkled skin. This was supposed to remind me of brotherhood. Some days it feels more like a scar. Ethan's eyes burned. He wanted to say something, anything, but words felt small. Instead, he whispered, "Tell me their names, all of them." And Samuel did, slowly, painfully. He spoke each name: Harris, Johnson, Little Mike, Davis, Carter, Lee, names that had lived in silence for decades. As he said them, his voice broke, but he pushed on. Ethan repeated them softly after him, like a vow, engraving them into his own heart. By the time Samuel finished, his coffee was cold. The cafe had grown quieter, the sun dipping lower, shadows stretching long across the floor. Ethan sat frozen, his mind reeling, his chest aching with the weight of stories he'd never forget. Finally, Samuel leaned back, exhausted but strangely lighter. His voice was hoarse. "Promise me something, son. Promise me you'll remember them when you're out there. Carry their names with you, because as long as someone remembers, they're never really gone." Ethan's voice cracked as he swore. I promise, sir, I'll remember them, always." The 2 men clasped hands across the tabouillon, strength meeting old, future meeting past. For a long moment, nothing else mattered. Not the cafe, not the world outside, just a silent vow sealed between them. When Ethan finally stood, he looked back one last time. Samuel gave a faint nod, his eyes shining, a true smile breaking through, at last. And as Ethan walked into the fading light, he knew he wasn't just a SEAL anymore. He was a bearer of a legacy, carrying the weight of names that would never again be forgotten. Samuel sat back, whispered the names once more under his breath, but this time, they weren't heavy. They were alive again, remembered, and for the first time in years, Samuel felt peace. The night air outside the cafe was cooler now, carrying the faint scent of rain that hadn't yet fallen. Ethan stood just beyond the door, hands in his pockets, staring at the street but seeing none of it. His mind was locked on Samuel's tattoo, the names, the stories that had poured out like blood from an old wound. He felt as if the ground beneath him had shifted, as if he had been entrusted with something too sacred to ever lay down. Inside, Samuel sat alone again, but his heart didn't feel quite as heavy. For years he had carried silence like a stone in his chest, and tonight, a crack had formed. He thought the boy would leave, vanish like all the others who drifted in and out of his life. But an hour later, when the cafe owner dimmed the lights and began stacking chairs, the bell on the door jingled again. Ethan walked back in, hesitant but determined. Samuel raised an eyebrow, half amused. Didn't get enough, son? Ethan slid into the chair across from him again. No, sir, I didn't. I couldn't stop thinking about what you said. About Davis, about little Mike. I want to know everything, if you're willing. Samuel studied him for a long moment, then chuckled softly. You remind me of myself, once, hungry for stories, not realizing how heavy they really are. He leaned forward, his voice quieter now. But you're different. You're willing to carry them. That matters. He rubbed his tattoo absent-mindedly, then let his mind drift back. I'll tell you about the longest night, he began. The night I thought none of us would make it out alive. Ethan straightened, bracing himself. Samuel's eyes turned, distant, his voice slipping into memory. It was deep in the jungle, weeks into a mission that had already cost too much. Supplies were low, tempers high, bodies exhausted. Rain fell endlessly, drenching uniforms until skin chafed raw. The mud clung like chains to every step, and the mosquitoes were merciless, biting until the men bled. They hadn't seen the sun in days, only gray skies through the thick canopy. But worse than all of it was the silence, the waiting, the not knowing when the enemy would strike. Samuel's unit had been ordered to intercept a convoy carrying weapons through the valley. Intelligence said it would be heavily guarded, and they would have only one chance. We knew it was suicide, Samuel admitted, his voice low, but orders are orders. And when you fight with brothers, you don't question, you just go. They set up through the night, moving like ghosts through the foliage. Samuel described the feel of wet leaves brushing his face, the way the mud sucked at his boots. He could still hear the nervous breathing of Carter behind him, the steady whisper of Davis at his side, always calm, always steady. The convoy arrived just before dawn. Trucks, guards armed to the teeth, eyes scanning the tree line. Samuel's team lay in silence, hearts pounding, waiting for the signal. When the first shot cracked the air, Samuel whispered. The jungle exploded into chaos. Gunfire lit up the trees, tracers streaking like angry fireflies. Samuel remembered leaping from cover, his rifle bucking against his shoulder, the sharp smell of cordite filling his nose. The truck screeched to a halt, men shouting, bullets chewing into bark inches from his face. He moved on instinct, shouting orders, returning fire, diving into the mud as grenades ripped holes into the earth. He saw Harris, charging forward, fearless as always, before a blast threw him back into the undergrowth. He heard little Mike screaming, orders though his voice barely carried over the thunder of combat. And Davis covering the flank, his fire precise, unshakable, keeping the enemy at bay. The battle stretched on, minutes feeling like hours. The convoy burned, flames licking the sky, smoke stinging eyes and lungs. Samuel's voice trembled as he spoke. We were outnumbered 3-1, but we held, not because we were stronger, not because we were better, but because we refused to leave each other behind. Then came the turning point. Samuel described it slowly, as if each word were carved from stone. The enemy had flanked them, pouring fire from higher ground. They were pinned, their ammo nearly gone, men bleeding in the mud. And that was when Davis made his choice. He looked at me, Samuel said, his voice breaking. He didn't speak, he just gave me this look I'll never forget. And then he charged, straight into the fire. He drew their attention, laid down everything he had. It gave us just enough time to pull back, to drag Harris out, to regroup. By the time the firing stopped, Samuel's throat tightened. He was gone. The man who saved all of us was gone. Ethan's eyes burned. He wanted to ask 100 questions, but his chest was too tight to speak. Samuel's hands shook now, and he pressed them flat against the table as if grounding himself. That night, he whispered, I buried part of myself in that jungle. We all did. We carved Davis's initials into the wood. I swore I'd never forget. But after the war, the world forgot us anyway. Ethan finally found his voice. Not anymore, he said fiercely. You've told me, and I'll remember. I'll carry Davis with me. I'll carry all of them. His voice cracked, but his resolve was clear. Samuel's eyes softened. For a long moment, he just looked at Ethan, as if measuring him. Then he nodded slowly. You mean it. I can see it in your eyes. That matters more than you know. The cafe was empty now, chairs stacked, lights dim, but neither man noticed. They were lost in the weight of the past and the fragile hope of remembrance. Samuel leaned back, letting out a long breath. You asked me how I survived. Truth is, I didn't. Not the way you think. Survival isn't about walking away with your body intact. It's about carrying ghosts and finding a way to keep moving. Some men drink to forget. Some never stop fighting. Even when the war's over, I went silent. I let the world think I was gone. But maybe, he glanced at Ethan, maybe I was just waiting for someone like you to ask the right questions. Ethan swallowed hard. I'm glad I did. He hesitated, then added quietly, I'm shipping out soon. My first real deployment. And now, I feel like I'm not going alone. Like they're with me. Samuel smiled faintly. That's the point, son. You're never alone. Not if you remember. For a long while, they sat in silence, 2 generations bound by a tattoo, a story, and a promise. Outside, rain finally began to fall, soft against the glass, as if the world itself was listening, mourning, remembering. Samuel closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, his gaze was steady. There's more, he said. More you need to hear before you go. Because carrying their names isn't just about pride. It's about knowing what sacrifice looks like, what it costs. Are you ready for that? Ethan's jaw tightened. He nodded. Yes, sir, I'm ready. Samuel leaned forward, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. Then let me tell you about the last mission. The one that ended everything. And Ethan braced himself, knowing that what he was about to hear would change him forever.